There we go. Let's go. I went and sing David. You guys keep David in your prayers. If you want to know where that rehab is, if you know where the Gadsden State Exchange is in Center, it's right beside it. That's where that rehab is at. So y'all just keep him in your prayers. Is there anybody, make sure, packing party, make sure to keep that in your prayers. And remember, I think Sunday is when we're going to be praying over the boxes. I believe it's this Sunday, so remember that. Also, Kim's son, keep him in your prayers. He came home, and I think he's completely immobile for 2 weeks. So y'all remember him. So anybody else? Go ahead.
My sister's husband, they live in Huntsville. He passed away this morning.
Oh, no.
He's been sick.
Yeah.
He's been in hospital.
Sure will. So y'all keep them in your prayers. Anybody else? What? Yeah. What do you got? In Spain? Yeah, in your city. Spain is flooding. So please keep that city in your prayers in Spain. So thank you. We will definitely do that for you, I promise. In Spain, yes. That's anybody else? Does somebody have? Yeah, Christy's, here's what happened with Christy. I didn't want to put it all in a text. Her mother fell and broke her other hip this morning about 1 o'clock. And then her dad, while the ambulance was there, started having, they thought he might be having a heart attack. So they're both in the hospital right now. So just make sure to keep them in your prayers. I haven't got any more information or updates on that, so just keep them in your prayers. I think it's at St. Vincent. Is that in Birmingham? Yeah. Anybody else?
Chris, Dr. Williams, I promised his secretary I'd tell. Dr. Williams and Boaz, you may know him, the dentist.
Yeah.
His wife's been real sick for a month.
Okay, that's who I go to.
She's out for a week. We're real good friends. He's diabetic. We talk a lot, but he's a fine man.
He's a good guy.
She's had a lot. He had to go spend a week with her up in Memphis up there. But I met a super nice lady. Unusual problem and not getting any better. So I told her, I said, I'll make sure I mention that.
Yeah, they're members at Mount Vernon. Yeah, they're members at Mount Vernon at Albertville. So y'all remember them. Good people, really good people. Anybody else?
Well, remember Renee Croft again. She's
Okay.
going through therapy, but she's still not driving.
Okay.
The kids are having to take care of her in the house. She can get around a little bit, but she's not doing good.
Okay, we sure will. Renee Croft. Anybody else? All right, let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead. Oh, we got a new music. Look at that.
Y'all staying tonight? We're going to say page 151.
the Lord calling. All right, Joshua, book of Joshua. We're going to look through some of the chapters of the book of Joshua. I know I've preached out of the book of Joshua a couple of times and looked at it, but we've never really dove completely into this book. It's a fascinating book. So the book of Joshua, what is interesting about the book of Joshua is that it is basically takes place after the law has been written. The law was written in Exodus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, Leviticus, and then after the law was written, the law was handed down from God unto Moses. This is when you have the book of Joshua. Joshua is extremely famous individual, very famous individual. He's actually a key person in this book. The book of Joshua, also Rahab is a key individual, and also Caleb. So your three key individuals is going to be Joshua, Rahab, and Caleb. What happens in the book of Joshua is the covenant that God made with Abraham. Now, you remember that God makes a covenant with Abraham back in the book of Genesis, chapter 12, and he also makes a covenant with Abraham in Genesis chapter 15. So in Genesis chapter 12, and we're going to take our time and go through this, I promise. I'm not going to hurry. But in Genesis chapter 12, this is the covenant. This is where the covenant starts. And we've talked about this a few times, that a covenant is not based on what a person can keep. It is based on the fact that God keeps the covenant. All right? So in Genesis chapter 12, verses 1, it says, "Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee." And that since October the 7th of last year, they've been on the news a lot. It's the nation of Israel. This is the country that God is actually talking about. And this is the covenant he's going to make, all right? Now, in the Old Testament, you got several covenants that is made. It is a covenant that is made with, obviously, Noah, and that is the covenant that God is not going to flood the earth again. There is the covenant with Abraham, and this is the covenant that we're going to be looking at a little bit, and it is about the nation of Israel. There is the covenant of David, which the covenant means that the seed of David is never going to depart from the throne. So there are several covenants that takes place in the Old Testament. Now, when you get to the New Testament, you only have one covenant. The only covenant you have is the covenant, and some people will call it the covenant of Christ. Some people call it the covenant of the cross, the covenant of Calvary, the covenant of everlasting, the covenant of salvation. It's all the same. And that covenant is that Jesus Christ came to the earth, died, rose again, it is in heaven, and he's coming back for us. That is that covenant. So the covenant that it takes place in the Old Testaments, those covenants, and there's several of them, they are still relevant today. They have not been broken. The expiration date has not run out on these covenants. And what I mean by that is this covenant that God is going to give Abraham in Genesis chapter 12 and also verses 15. Genesis chapter 12 and chapter 15 still holds true today, that Israel is God's land. The Israelites are God's people. The Jews are God's people. He's always going to protect them. One day, he's going to bring them all back together. They're going to look upon Christ, whom they have crucified, and they are going to weep. But this is the covenant. And it says in verses 2, chapter 12 of Genesis, and this is before we even get into the book of Joshua. It says, "I will make thee a great nation." Joshua is going to take this over. This is what Joshua is about, the fulfilling of this covenant. "I will make thee a great nation," and they are, "I will," and you'll notice that none of this depends on Abraham. The only thing Abraham has to do is get away from his country, get away from his family, get away from his friends, and fully rely on God. And that is basically what the story of Abraham is about, is fully relying on God. And the story of what Joshua is about is fully relying on God. And what happens to a people group, to a church, to a country that does not fully rely on God. There are consequences for that. And he says, now look, in the last part of verses 1, chapter 12, "I will show you this." Verse 2, "I will make thee a great nation. I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing." I'm going to do all of this. "I will bless them that bless thee." And if you look at the covenant that you find in the New Testament, Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Any man that cometh to the Father by me, will no wise cast out. That's a covenant. Jesus Christ also talks about, I am the light, I am the way, I am the good shepherd, I am the vine. Those are the covenants that Jesus lays down. And Jesus Christ says it's all about me. And in the book of Genesis, this covenant is all about God blessing Abraham. All right? It says, I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all the families, every one of them, all the families of the earth shall be blessed. And that takes place still today, even in 2024. All the families are going to be blessed. Now, there is the covenant that is handed down, and then there is the human responsibility of this covenant that Abraham has to do, okay? Now, God is going to honor this covenant, all right? Even if Abraham does not comply with it, God is still going to honor it, all right? Because he says there's not ifs, ands, or buts. He says, I'm going to do this. But when you look at the blessings and the cursings, that's not a covenant. Those are just blessings and cursings. With the covenant, it is, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. All right, now, look in verses 4. So Abram, this is before the name change, departed as the Lord had spoken unto him. And there's the big mistake, the very first mistake that Abraham makes. And it amazes me that when you have these Old Testament patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and there's several more, how fallen these people are. I mean, they were just like us. They had no special superhuman power. They were just like us. They had their good times and they had their bad times. Sometimes they walked with God. Sometimes they did not walk with God. And Abraham is one of these people. And you'll notice he tells them in verses 1, get out of their country and from thy kindred and from my father's house. Those are the three things that Abraham has to do. All right? And he already, in just 2 short verses, breaks that, because guess what he does in verses 4? He brings Lot with him. So there is the first covenant, okay? Look in verses 7. And the Lord appeared unto Abram and said, unto thy seed I will give this land. And the first thing that Abraham does is he builds an altar unto the Lord who remembered him. All right? So he tells him, wherever your feet touch, that's going to be your land. Now, go to chapter 15. And I just wanted to kind of go over this before we get into the book of Joshua. All right. God is going to reestablish this covenant. It is not that he is going to make a new covenant. He's just going to make sure that Abraham understands, and he is going to, when I say reestablish, he's going to remind Abraham what God is going to do. Okay? And this is it. Abraham goes in chapter 15. And in verse 9, he is told to take a heifer of 3 years old, a she-goat of 3 years old, a ram of 3 years old, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. Those are the sacrifices. And he takes them all and he divides them. He cuts them in two. He lays half on one side and half on the other. All right? And then God makes Abraham fall into a deep sleep. And while Abraham is asleep or falling into this great sleep, God passes between the sacrifices, thus saying, I have made this promise to you, Abraham. I'm going to keep this promise to you. And it tells us, look, and when the sun went down in verses 12, was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and lo, a horror of great darkness fell upon him. All right? And he said unto Abram, know thou surely that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land. And you'll find this out in Joshua. Stranger in a land that is not theirs. That's in Joshua. And he shall serve them, and they shall afflict them for 400 years. Now that moves to Egypt. So you have Egypt, and then you have Israel. When they go into that strange land, it is strange to them, and they are strangers, but eventually they take it over, okay? So this is a two-part. Look in verses 17. And when it came to pass that the sun went completely down, it was dark. Behold, a smoking furnace as a burning lamp passed through those pieces. And that same day, verses 18, the Lord made a what? Covenant with him, saying, unto thy seed I will give to this land. He's already made the covenant now in chapter 12. He's just reestablishing the covenant now in chapter 15. All right? And something I want you to keep in mind. I don't care if you're studying Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Ezekiel, Nehemiah, whatever. The same God that you find establishing this covenant with Abraham is still the same God that we serve today. There's no difference. He's not changed, all right? So he is still the same God. Now, does this covenant have anything to do with us? This is the land of Israel covenant. This is the Jewish covenant or the Abrahamic covenant, all right? It is just for them, just for their land. But with the book of Joshua, we can glean things from the book of Joshua that we can apply to our lives. All right? So if you want to write some of this stuff down, you go right ahead. The name Joshua basically means Jehovah is mine. That's what the name Joshua means. All right? The key words in the book of Joshua, we're going to go through this book, I promise. It's going to take a while, but we will go through this book. The key words is going to be possession and the word servant. So those are the two key words that you find in the book of Joshua. And if you guys, some of the guys that was here on Thursday nights when we went through this, some of this might be old hat to y'all, but just kind of bear with us. We'll get through just the basics here in just a second. So the key words are going to be possession and it's going to be servant. A possession, God giving them something. Now, move fast forward to the New Testament. What is that possession that we have? It is the possession of eternal life, forgiveness of sins, grace, mercy, forgiveness, long-suffering, patience from God. That is what we possess when we follow Christ. In the book of Joshua, they are possessing a physical land, a dirt. That's what they're possessing, all right? And it is servant. Because you'll notice that it says, now after the death of Moses, the servant. That's in verse 1. So Moses is going to be described as being a servant. Joshua is going to be described as being a servant. Caleb is going to be described as being a servant. Anyone that follows Christ, especially in this book of Joshua, is going to be somebody that takes possession of something that God has given them, all right, and then is a servant. If somebody in your family passes away, God forbid it happens, somebody in your family passes away and leaves you some land, let's just say some land. In order for you to possess that land and take it into ownership, you have to go to that place. That is the only way you can receive the ownership of that land. If you do not go to that land, if you do not go to that place, you're not going to possess it. That land does not become yours until you go in and possess it. Now, with Christ, it's different in here. Christ now is going to tell them they have this land. It's already theirs. All right? Now, if they do not go and possess it, is it still theirs? Absolutely, because what did God do in Genesis chapter 12 and chapter 15? Made a covenant with them, said this is going to be your land, all right? That is what is so amazing about God, is that he never changes, all right? Now, there are two crossings that you find in the Old Testament, two river crossings. The first crossing you find in the Old Testament is going to be found in the book of Exodus, and it is the crossing of the Red Sea. Everybody understands that one. And where are they leaving when they crossed the Red Sea? Egypt. And Egypt is a type of the world. It is a type of bondage. They were there 400 years. So that is symbolic, or that symbolizes the nation of Israel leaving a land of bondage. If we spiritualize this in a Christian walk, when we are saved, so to speak, when we become Christians, we leave Egypt. There is a crossing, not a literal crossing, but there is a crossing from death unto life. There is an old person that has passed away. Behold, all things have what? Become new. So the old Chris that was lost, that guy is dead, and now the new Chris is alive. So you make a spiritual crossing. So in the book of Exodus, if we spiritualize this or symbolize this, we can look at the book of Exodus and say when the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, they were leaving the land of bondage. It was a separation. But here's what's interesting about them crossing the Red Sea. Did it stop Pharaoh from pursuing the children of Israel? No. So let's just say when you become a Christian and you make that Red Sea crossing, does the devil immediately leave you alone? What happens? Ramps up. I've probably told you this story before. Several years, I had a really good friend of mine that was rough. He was rough. God saves him. And a few months later, I seen him. I was down at Scottsboro. I seen him. And he goes, I'll never regret becoming a Christian. Never. He said, but the devil didn't bother me before I become a Christian. He said, I promise. And he got saved in Woodville at an old-fashioned missionary Baptist church in the woods. He said, as soon as I walked out those wooden steps and walked in that parking lot, he said it was both feet. Now, when the children of Israel crossing the Red Sea, are they safe? No. Because guess who's pursuing them the whole time? Pharaoh. Now, after they cross the Red Sea, are they safe? No, because now you have the children of Anak, you have the Amalekites, and they are constantly fighting the children of Israel. So our lives as Christians, okay, our lives as Christians is essentially a constant battle. Because the devil, Satan, is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. And it tells us in the New Testament, every morning when we get up, we put on the whole armor of God. Why do we put on the whole armor of God? So we can fight Satan. Amen. It's every single day. I've been guilty. I don't know if you guys have been guilty some days of just leaving some of the armor off. But you have to have every bit of it. Amen. Now, with the crossing of, we'll get into that when we get into chapter 2. All right, we'll talk about the crossing of Jordan. Okay. Joshua, he was the individual that fought the Amalekites. You know the story when Moses is on the mountain and as long as he holds his arms up, the children of Israel win. But when he drops his arms, what happened? They start losing. Joshua is the one down there doing the fighting. All right. Joshua, when you start looking at the book of Joshua, is 40 years old. By the time you get through with Joshua, he's 80-ish. It's a long journey for Joshua. Joshua is the individual that, you remember when Moses is on Mount Sinai, he's getting the law, and God informs Moses, the children of Israel, and I'm summarizing this, have made a golden calf, and they're worshiping this golden calf. And when Moses is coming off the mountain, do you know who the very first person he meets and takes a stand with Moses? It's Joshua. Joshua and Caleb. Joshua was one of the original 12 spies. He was one of the ones that went into the promised land for 40 days, came out and said, we can take it. And Caleb was one that says, we can take it. But the rest of the children of Israel says, we can't. So when God hands the reins over from Moses to Joshua, it is in very capable hands. But with Joshua, he still is a fallen individual. He will make mistakes. They do not conquer the land completely. They are going to make a league with the Gibeonites, and it is their downfall. And from that league, and we'll look at it, from that league with the Gibeonites, they start slowly and surely being taken over by other countries and by other people. All right, now, this is a book also of encouragement. It is an encouraging book. Just in the first chapter alone, be strong, be of good courage. Be strong, be of good courage. Be strong, be of good courage. And it is a book of encouragement. Now, looking at us as a church, this building, the people that are in our church, us as Christians, are we to be encouragers to each other? Yes. Why are we to be encouragers to each other? Because as soon as you get out those doors, guess what's going to happen? You're not going to get very much encouragement from the world. So us as Christians, we are, especially at Crossville First Baptist Church, we are to encourage others. We are to encourage our brothers in Christ and our sisters in Christ. So this is a book of encouragement. But also, and it's like this with the book of Ecclesiastes. The book of Ecclesiastes is a book that basically teaches you what happens when you stop taking God seriously. Because in the book of Ecclesiastes, King Solomon says, listen, I had everything. I had money, fame, everything. And I decided, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to throw all of it to the wind. I'm going to live like the world. And at the end of the day, I'm going to balance out and see which one was better. That's what the book of Ecclesiastes is about. In the book of Joshua, it is the consequences of not following through with what God has put upon you. In your life, in your personal life, in your business life, in your spiritual life, in your church life. So it is about encouragement, but it is also about consequences. All right? Now, that was nearly a 30-minute introduction. All right, now, here we go. Book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 1. All right? This is directly after Moses dies. Yeah, Moses dies. I almost said Noah. Moses dies. And, you know, and you read, essentially, the last chapter in Deuteronomy chapter 34, and it's really a sad chapter. Because Moses, now get this, Deuteronomy chapter 34, Moses has been faithful to God. Very faithful to God. Everybody knows the story of Moses. If you hadn't, go home and watch 10 Commandments with Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner. It's a great movie. Anyway, been faithful to God. But you remember that God tells Moses, and I usually get this story backwards. He tells Moses one time to strike the rock and water will come out. It's the beginning of the journey. Am I getting that right? Strike the rock first, and he does that. The second time God speaks to Moses, he tells Moses to speak to the rock and water will come out. Instead of speaking to it, Moses, out of his frustration, and you can't blame Moses, he's leading around 4 million complainers, takes his rod and he strikes the rock, and what does God say? Just for that, you're not going to get to see the promised land. You're not going to get to enter it. For one mistake. All right? So Moses, this is what is interesting about Moses. For 40 years, he knew this was going to happen. 40 years. This was not, you get to Deuteronomy chapter 34, and all of a sudden Moses surprisingly finds out, I'm not going to go get to live in the promised land. God tells him all the way back in Exodus, you're not going to go live in the promised land because you disobeyed me. So for 40 years, Moses wanders in that wilderness with the children of Israel, knowing I'm not going to ever get to step foot over in the promised land. But do you know what Moses remained? He remained faithful to God. Even though he knew, I'm not going to get to go over there. And I'm sure Moses, being Moses and being a man, a flawed individual, an imperfect individual, more than likely laid down at night sometimes and thought, why did I do that? How stupid could I have been? He told me to speak to it. I took a stick. Why did I do that? Now, guess what? I'm not going to be able to see it. And more than likely, everything is not ever, all of God's conversations with people are not recorded in these scriptures. I guarantee Moses at one or more times asked God, can you change your mind on this? Well, I'd love to go in there. Can't. So you get to Deuteronomy chapter 34. Moses went up from the plains of Moab into the mountains of Nebo, which is at Pisgah. That is over against Jericho, the very first place they're going to conquer. All right? If you look at a map in your Bible, you have the Sea of Galilee at the top, and then you have that little water line that runs all the way to the Dead Sea. At the top of that, at the very top of the Dead Sea to the north, on the east, on the west side is going to be Jericho. It's going to be in that area where this takes place, all right? Moses is on the west side. He's going to get to view over to the east side, okay? So he goes up, and the Lord showed him all the land of Gilead unto Dan, unto Naphtali, to Ephraim, to Manasseh, to Judah, in the utmost part of the sea. In the south, verse 3, the plain of the valley of Jericho, the city of palms, which is in Zorah. And you'll notice, I want you to look at this in Deuteronomy chapter 34. They believe that Joshua writes this, okay? When Joshua is writing this, the land has already been divvied up. Because you notice how he tells them? He says that he is looking not at the land of milk and honey. How does he describe Israel now? He describes it in territories that the tribes have already taken. So that just goes to prove this is written years after, because he describes it as Naphtali, Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, Jericho, up to Zorah. Look in verses 4. And the Lord said unto him, this is the land which I swear unto Abraham, Genesis 12, Genesis 15. This is the land that I promised Abraham, and unto Isaac, and unto Jacob, saying, I will give it unto thy seed. I have caused thee to see it with thine own eyes, but it's the consequences. Aren't you glad we don't live under the law? You know what the law stated? You break it, there's no bringing in a defense attorney. It's not, hey, I plead the fifth. God's like, you broke it, you die. We do not live, you know what we live under now? Grace. What would you rather live under? You made a mistake, can't see the promised land, or you made a mistake, God, please forgive me, I forgive you, let's keep going. I'd rather live under grace. But thou shalt not go over it. I promise you, Moses was heartbroken. He goes up on top of Mount Nebo. He's not with anyone else. He's by himself, and you'll find out why here in a minute. He is by himself. It's just him and God. Can you imagine Moses goes back 40 years, and he thinks to himself, there was a time back on Mount Sinai I spoke with God, and he told me I was going to go free his people. He told me that I was going to, have this power, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. Guess where he's back? He's back with God, not on the same mountain, but he's on Mount Nebo, and it's just him and God. Mountaintop experiences with God. Have you ever had those? I have. But do you know what? There's got to be valleys in life, because without the valleys, you don't appreciate the mountaintops as much. Moses, for 40 years, has been told, you're not going to go. You're not going to go. Now, if we get to verses 5, the Moses of servant dies in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he buried him, he buried him in a valley in the land of Moab. You know who the he is? It's the only time we see God as an undertaker. The only time, it's the only person he's ever buried. God raised up Moses. God buried Moses. God was with Moses for 120 years each and every day. We can look at this in a life of a child of God. Jesus Christ saves us. Guess who's going to be with us every step of the way, even into the grave, and then after the grave for eternity? It's going to be God. So he buries Moses there. No man knoweth where his tomb is unto this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died. His eyes was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab for 30 days. So the days of weeping and mourning of Moses was ended. This is what I've always liked about God. He gives you a time of mourning, and then after it's over, well, guess what he does? All right, let's keep going. No more squalling, no more crying, let's go. It's not funny, but it is. He's going to give them 30 days. I'll give you 30 days to squall around. But after 30 days, you're going to cross over to Jordan. That tells us in the life of a Christian, there was a song, I think it was by the Birds, that sung it there, to everything, turn, turn, there's a season, turn, turn, for things under heaven. I know you know it because you're that old. But there is that song, all right? There is a time to mourn. There is a time to weep. There is a time to be happy. There is a time to sad. There's a time to reap. There's a time to sow. God is giving them their time of weeping and mourning. But weeping and mourning may endure for the night. But guess what? Joy is coming in the morning. More than likely, those by day 10, the children of Israel is probably thinking, this is just all falling apart. Moses is buried. We don't know where he's at. When it comes decoration time, we can't go plant no flowers. We don't know what's going to happen. Day 20, what are we going to do? Day 29, what are we going to do? Day 30, God says, okay, you're done. Let's go. That just tells us in the life of a church, and I'm sure the children of Israel would have been perfectly happy on that side of Jordan, because we're already going to find out Gad, Reuben, and the half-tribe of Manasseh is going to be perfectly fine on that side. They're going to be perfectly fine on the east side, not going over. So they would have been perfectly happy not crossing over. The reason that God is going to give them 30 days and then end it because he does not want them to be complacent. It's extremely easy. You know, people say, and everybody's experienced this. If you want to know how easy it is to get out of church and get out of the will of God, skip one Sunday. Skip 2. Skip 3. And do you know what happens before you know it? It's been 5 years. It's easy to do that because you will get complacent. God is not going to allow the children of Israel to get complacent. And we as Christians, and I'm fixing to close, we as Christians, sometimes in our lives, in our personal lives, in our family lives, in our Christian lives, in our church lives, wherever, we sometimes get complacent. All right? I'm guilty of it. All right? You guys may be guilty of it. In Joshua, verse 9, the son of Nun was full of spirit and wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands upon him, and the children of Israel hearkened unto him, and he did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there, verse 10, arose not a prophet since in Israel like unto Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. And all the signs and wonders which the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all of his servants and to all of his land. You get to the book of Joshua, crying's done, weeping's done, squalling's done, feeling sorry for yourself is done. Joshua is a time to get to work book. That's what it is, and that's why I love it so much. Dear Heavenly Father, we love you and we thank you. Dear God, in our lives as Christians, I'm guilty of it. I'm guilty of becoming complacent. God, I ask this church not to get complacent. Dear God, help us to always have a fire and a desire, dear God, to spread your gospel. Dear God, for the prayer requests we have heard for the people that's in Spain, we lift them up, dear God, to you. Dear God, for our country, we lift it up to you. But dear God, for our small town